Introduction: The Invisible Architect. Have you ever walked out of a store, having spent more than you intended, and couldn't quite explain why? You had a list, a budget, a firm resolve. Yet you walked out with 3 extra items, swayed by a limited-time offer or a friendly salesperson's recommendation. You chalk it up to a moment of weakness, a simple impulse. But what if it wasn't? What if your decision wasn't entirely your own? Or consider an argument you had with someone you care about. You were so certain of your position, so clear on the facts. Every piece of information you found seemed to confirm your viewpoint, while their arguments seemed flimsy, biased, and illogical. You wondered how they could possibly see the world so differently. What if that certainty, that absolute conviction, was actually a mental trap, a trick of the mind designed to keep you comfortable rather than lead you to the truth? What if I told you that an invisible architect is shaping the very structure of your thoughts? It builds the walls of your beliefs, lays down the pathways of your decisions, and designs the emotional landscape of your reality. This architect is not some external force. It's not a conspiracy. It is a silent, powerful, and deeply embedded part of your own mind. It operates on a code written not in the last few years, but over hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, a code that is now, in our modern world, full of glitches. These glitches, these systematic errors in our thinking, are known as cognitive biases. They are not rare. They are not signs of low intelligence. They are a fundamental part of the human condition, affecting everyone from the janitor to the CEO, from the artist to the scientist. They are the reason we misjudge others, make irrational financial decisions, cling to false beliefs, and find it so difficult to change our minds. Tonight, we are not going to simply learn a list of these biases. We are going to take a journey into the operating system of the human brain. We will explore how these mental shortcuts were born, how they secretly control our lives, and most importantly, how we can begin to reclaim our cognitive freedom. You're about to meet the invisible architect of your mind, and by the end of our journey, you will no longer be its unwitting resident. You will become its conscious co-designer. So take a deep breath, quiet your surroundings, and let us begin to explore the hidden world within. Section 1. What are cognitive biases? The brain's flawed code. To understand cognitive biases, we must first understand the brain's fundamental challenge. It is an organ of immense power, forced to operate on a tight energy budget. Your brain, while only making up about 2% of your body weight, consumes a staggering 20% of your body's energy. Thinking is metabolically expensive. To cope with the overwhelming flood of information from the world, billions of bits of data every second, the brain has developed an ingenious solution: shortcuts. Think of your mind as having 2 operating systems, a concept popularized by the psychologist and Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the automatic, intuitive, and effortless system. It's the one that lets you instantly know that 2 plus 2 is 4, recognize a friend's face in a crowd, or feel a jolt of fear when a car horn blares. It's fast, efficient, and operates unconsciously. It's the brain's autopilot, handling thousands of routine tasks without you ever having to think about them. System 2 is the deliberate, analytical, and effortful system. This is the one you engage when you solve a complex math problem, parallel park a car for the first time, or try to follow the intricate plot of a confusing movie. It is slow, it requires concentration, and consumes a lot of mental energy. It is the conscious, reasoning part of your mind. Now, because System 2 is so costly to run, your brain prefers to use System 1 whenever possible. It defaults to the path of least resistance. And this is where cognitive biases are born. Cognitive biases are in essence the bugs in System 1's programming. They are the systematic errors that occur when our fast, intuitive thinking makes a judgment that our slow, logical thinking would have corrected had it been given the chance. Imagine you are walking through city. System 2 is like pulling out a detailed map, plotting a precise route, checking for traffic, and calculating the exact walking time. System 1 is like simply following the tallest building you see, assuming it's in the general direction you want to go. Most of the time, this shortcut works surprisingly well. It saves you time and effort. But sometimes it will lead you down a dead-end street or into the wrong neighborhood entirely. Cognitive biases are these dead-end streets of the mind. They are predictable patterns of deviation from rational judgment. They aren't random mistakes. They are consistent and repeatable errors that arise from the very structure of our cognition. They are not a sign of a broken brain, but rather a sign of a brain that is working exactly as it was designed to. A brain designed for survival in a world that no longer exists. Section 2. The evolutionary roots of bias. Survival before truth. Why would evolution saddle us with such a flawed mental toolkit? The answer is simple and profound. The brain is not optimized for truth. It is optimized for survival. For our ancestors living on the African savanna, making a decision quickly was far more important than making it perfectly. Consider a simple scenario. You are a prehistoric human. You hear a rustle in the tall grass. You have two options. You can engage your System 2 thinking. Let me analyze the sound. What is the probability that it's a dangerous predator versus just the wind or a small, harmless animal? While you're standing there, weighing the evidence, the lion pounces. Or you can use a System 1 shortcut, a cognitive bias. This bias might be something like an agency detection bias, the tendency to assume that any unexplained event is caused by a conscious agent. The rustle isn't just the wind. Something made it, and that something is probably dangerous. So, you don't think. You run. 9 times out of 10, you might have been wrong. It was just the wind. But the one time you were right, the bias saved your life. The thoughtful, rational human who waited for more data was eaten and did not pass on their genes. The jumpy human who saw danger everywhere survived to have children. We are the descendants of the jumpy human. This is the principle of error management theory. When making a judgment under uncertainty, there are 2 possible types of errors: a false positive, thinking there's a lion when there isn't, or a false negative, thinking there's no lion when there is. The cost of a false positive is minimal, a little wasted energy, a moment of needless panic. The cost of a false negative is catastrophic, death. Evolution, therefore, wired our brains to make the less costly error. It's better to be safe than sorry. Many of our biases are relics of this survival-first programming. Need for speed. In a dangerous world, he who hesitates is lost. This led to heuristics and biases that prioritize rapid conclusions over meticulous analysis.
Information overload. Our brains couldn't possibly process everything. So we evolved to filter information, pay attention only to what seems important, and fill in the gaps with assumptions. This is the root of many attention and memory biases. Need for meaning. The world is a chaotic, random place. To navigate it, we create stories and find patterns, even when they don't exist. This helps us make sense of our environment, but also leads to biases where we see causality and intention where there is only coincidence. Need for social cohesion. Humans are tribal creatures. Survival depended on belonging to a group. This led to a powerful suite of social biases that make us favor our own group, distrust outsiders, and conform to the consensus, even when it's wrong. The problem is that we are now running this ancient, Savannah-optimized software in the incredibly complex, data-rich, and socially intricate world of the 21st century. The shortcuts that kept us safe from lions are now causing us to make disastrous investment decisions, misjudge the character of others, and polarize ourselves into warring political tribes. The glitches are no longer harmless. They are shaping our civilization.
Section 3. A Catalog of Control. Exploring the Biases. Now let us begin our exploration of the biases themselves. We will group them into categories to better understand how they operate. As we go through them, don't just see them as abstract concepts. Try to see them in your own life, in your own decisions, and in the world around you. This self-awareness is the first step toward regaining control. Part 3.1. Biases of Decision-Making and Behavior. The choices we think we make. These biases directly influence our actions and the choices we make, often without our conscious consent. Number 1. The anchoring effect. What it is: the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions. Once the anchor is set, we interpret subsequent information around it. Imagine you're buying a used car. The seller first says, "I was thinking of selling it for $10,000. That number, $10,000, is now anchored in your mind. Even if you know it's too high, you start negotiating down from that anchor. If you manage to get it for $7,500, you feel like you got a great deal, a $2,500 discount. But what if the car was only ever worth $6,000? The seller's initial arbitrary anchor made you pay $1,500 more than you should have, and you still walked away feeling victorious. This is used everywhere, from real estate pricing to salary negotiations to the original price listed next to a sale item. Why it works? Our brain latches on to the first piece of information as a reference point because starting from scratch is hard work. The anchor provides a convenient, though often irrelevant, starting point for our System 2 thinking. Number 2. The sunk cost fallacy. What it is: the tendency to continue an endeavor once an investment in money, effort, or time has been made, even when it's clear that the costs are no longer recoverable and the endeavor is failing. The story: you've spent 2 hours and $30 on tickets waiting for a famous musician's concert to start. A terrible unknown opening act has just finished, and you learn the main performer is sick and won't be coming. The logical choice is to leave and do something more enjoyable. But you think, "I can't leave now. I've already invested so much time and money." So you stay, miserably listening to more bad music, throwing good time after bad money. The original investment is sunk.
It's gone no matter what you do, but your irrational mind can't let it go. This fallacy keeps people in bad jobs, failing relationships, and unprofitable business ventures. Why it works? We are wired to be loss-averse. Admitting that a past investment was a waste feels like accepting a loss, which is emotionally painful. Continuing the endeavor, even if it's failing, creates the illusion that the initial investment might still pay off, protecting our ego from the pain of having made a bad decision. Number 3, the availability heuristic. What it is: overestimating the likelihood of events that are more easily recalled in memory, often because they are recent or emotionally charged. The example: after watching several news reports about a plane crash, people often become more afraid of flying, even though the statistical probability of being in a crash is incredibly low, far lower than the risk of a car accident. The dramatic, vivid, and easily available memory of the plane crash makes it seem more common than it is. Similarly, we might overestimate the prevalence of shark attacks after watching a scary movie about them. Why it works? Our System 1 equates easy to recall with highly probable. It's a mental shortcut that assumes our memory is a perfectly accurate reflection of reality, which it is not. Our memory is biased toward things that are dramatic, emotional, and recent. Number 4, the bandwagon effect. What it is: the tendency to do or believe things because many other people do or believe the same. The story: think of fashion trends, stock market bubbles, or viral internet challenges. An idea starts small, but as more people adopt it, it gains social proof. Others see its popularity and jump on the bandwagon, not necessarily because they've evaluated the idea on its own merits, but simply because it's popular. The belief's strength comes from its numbers, not its validity. Why it works? This is a powerful survival instinct. For our ancestors, going against the tribe was dangerous. Conforming to the group meant safety, acceptance, and a shared reality. Our brains are still wired with a deep-seated need to belong, making us highly susceptible to the pull of the crowd.
5. Choice overload. The paradox of choice. What it is: the phenomenon where having too many options can lead to decision-making paralysis, anxiety, and dissatisfaction with the final choice made. The research. In a famous study, psychologists set up a jam tasting booth. When they offered 24 different kinds of jam, more people stopped to look, but very few actually bought any. When they offered only 6 kinds of jam, fewer people stopped, but those who did were 10 times more likely to make a purchase. Too many choices overwhelmed the shoppers. Why it works? System 2 has to work hard to evaluate every option. When faced with dozens of choices, the cognitive load becomes too high. We become afraid of making the wrong choice and feel a greater sense of regret about the options we didn't pick, even if our final choice was a good one. We think we want more choices, but our brains often can't handle them. 6. The Dunning-Kruger effect. What it is: the cognitive bias whereby people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. It's a case of not knowing what you don't know. Conversely, experts often slightly underestimate their own competence because they are acutely aware of the nuances and complexities of their field. The example is rampant on the internet. Someone watches a 10-minute video about economics and suddenly feels qualified to debate a Nobel laureate. Their lack of knowledge is so profound that they can't even recognize their own incompetence.
They lack the metacognitive skill to accurately assess their own performance. The old saying captures it perfectly. A little knowledge is a dangerous thing. Why it works. To know you are bad at something requires the very knowledge you lack. For example, to know you're bad at grammar, you need a good understanding of grammar rules. Without that baseline knowledge, your performance feels adequate to you. 7. Loss aversion. What it is. The tendency to prefer avoiding losses to acquiring equivalent gains. The pain of losing is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining. The experiment. Would you take a bet where you have a 50-50 chance of either winning $150 or losing $100? Most people won't. The fear of losing $100 is much stronger than the appeal of winning $150, even though the potential gain is larger. For most people, the potential gain has to be at least double the potential loss to make the bet feel attractive. Why it works. From a survival perspective, losing your only food source was far more catastrophic than finding an extra one. Our brains are wired to protect what we already have, making us inherently conservative and risk-averse when faced with potential losses. This affects everything from our investment behavior, selling winning stocks too early and holding losing stocks too long, to our reluctance to part with possessions, the endowment effect. The 8th is the framing effect. What it is, drawing different conclusions from the same information depending on how that information is presented or framed. The example, imagine 2 yogurt pots. One is labeled 10% fat. The other is labeled 90% fat-free. They contain the exact same yogurt, but most people will perceive the 90% fat-free yogurt as the healthier option and be more likely to buy it. The positive framing, focusing on the fat-free part, is more appealing than the negative framing, focusing on the fat content. This is used constantly in marketing, public health messaging, and politics. Why it works. System 1 reacts emotionally to the frame itself before System 2 has a chance to analyze the raw data. Fat-free triggers a positive, healthy feeling, while fat triggers a negative one. 8. The IKEA effect. What it is. The tendency for people to place a disproportionately high value on products they partially created themselves. The story comes from the Swedish giant IKEA. The effort you put into assembling that bookshelf, deciphering the cryptic instructions, and tightening every screw makes you value it more than a pre-assembled identical bookshelf. Your labor has become part of the product's story, and therefore its value in your mind. This is also why things like build-your-own teddy bear workshops or cake mixes that require you to add an egg are so successful. Because it taps into our deep-seated need for competence and control. By contributing to the creation of an object, we imbue it with a piece of ourselves. It becomes a testament to our effort and skill, and we are psychologically wired to love what we create. 10. The Ben Franklin effect. What it is. A psychological phenomenon where a person who has done a favor for someone else is more likely to do another favor for that person than they would be if they had received a favor from that person. The story. Benjamin Franklin, as the story goes, had a political rival who disliked him. Instead of trying to win him over with favors, Franklin asked him if he could borrow a rare and valuable book from his library. The man, surprised but flattered, agreed. Franklin returned it a week later with a thank you note. From that day on, The rival became a lifelong friend. Why it works. Our brain struggles with cognitive dissonance. It asks, why did I do a favor for someone I dislike? The easiest way to resolve this conflict is to change the belief. I must actually like this person, otherwise I wouldn't have helped them. We subconsciously justify our actions by altering our feelings. Part 3.2. Biases of Belief and Perception. The reality we construct. These biases affect not what we do, but what we see, believe, and hold to be true. They are the filters through which we perceive reality. 11. Confirmation bias. What it is. The tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. It is the mother of all biases and perhaps the most dangerous. The example. A person believes that a certain political party is corrupt. They will unconsciously seek out news articles, opinion pieces, and social media posts that support this view. When they encounter information that suggests the party has done something good, they will dismiss it as biased, an anomaly, or fake news. They don't see themselves as biased. They see themselves as well-informed because their entire information diet confirms their initial conclusion. This creates echo chambers and filter bubbles that fuel political polarization. Why it works. Questioning our core beliefs is hard, uncomfortable, and energy-intensive work for System 2. It can trigger cognitive dissonance and threaten our sense of identity. It's far easier and more comforting for System 1 to simply seek out information that makes us feel right. 12. The halo effect. What it is. The tendency for a positive impression of a person, company, brand, or product in one area to positively influence one's opinion or feelings in other areas. The example. We often assume that attractive people are also more intelligent, kinder, and more competent than less attractive people, even with no evidence. Their physical attractiveness creates a halo that affects our judgment of their other traits. This is why celebrity endorsements are so powerful. We like an actor for their on-screen charisma, so we assume they have good taste in coffee or cars. Why it works. System 1 loves consistency. It wants to build a simple, coherent story. If person is attractive, a positive trait, it's easier to assume other positive traits than to hold a complex, mixed view, like person is attractive but may be unintelligent and unkind. The halo effect simplifies our social world. 13. The horns effect. What it is. The direct opposite of the halo effect. It's the tendency for a single negative trait to negatively influence our perception of a person's other traits. The example. You learn that a coworker has an annoying habit, like chewing loudly. This one negative trait, the horns, might cause you to unconsciously view their work as less competent, their ideas as less creative, and their personality as less trustworthy. The single negative detail contaminates your entire perception of them. Why it works. It's the same principle as the halo effect, our brain's desire for a simple, coherent narrative. If one piece of the puzzle is negative, System 1 prefers to paint the whole picture in a negative light. 14. The Bader-Meinhof phenomenon, frequency illusion. What it is. The illusion in which a word, a name, or a thing that has recently come to one's attention suddenly seems to appear with improbable frequency everywhere. The story. You decide you want to buy a red car. Suddenly, you see red cars everywhere on the road. It feels like there has been a sudden surge in the number of red cars in your city. But there hasn't been. The cars were always there. Your brain, now primed to look for red cars, is simply noticing them for the first time. Why it works? It's a combination of two psychological processes. First, selective attention. Your brain is now subconsciously looking for the new information. Second, confirmation bias. Every time you see a red car, your brain says, "See, there's another one. I knew it," confirming the perceived pattern.
20. The placebo effect. What it is: a phenomenon where a person experiences real improvements in their condition after being administered a fake or inert treatment, simply because they believe it will work. The story: in countless medical studies, a control group is given a sugar pill but told it's a powerful new drug. A significant percentage of this group will report a reduction in their symptoms, pain, nausea, depression, etc. The belief itself triggers a real physiological response in the brain and body. Why it works? It demonstrates the profound connection between the mind and the body. Our expectations can change our brain chemistry, releasing endorphins, natural painkillers, and other neurotransmitters that genuinely alter our physical experience. It's not all in your head. Your head is actively changing your body. Part 3.3. Social biases: the tribe and the outsider. These biases govern how we see ourselves in relation to others. They are the foundation of our social lives, our communities, and our deepest conflicts. 21. In-group bias: us versus them. What it is: the tendency for people to give preferential treatment to others they perceive to be members of their own group. The experiment: in the 1970s, psychologist Henri Tagel conducted his minimal group studies. He divided boys into two groups based on a completely arbitrary criterion: their supposed preference for one modern artist over another. Even with no history, no contact, and no conflict, the boys immediately began to favor their own group members, allocating more rewards to them and describing them with more positive terms. Why it works? This is perhaps the most fundamental survival bias. For millennia, your in-group was your source of safety, food, and identity. The out-group was a source of competition and danger. Our brains are deeply wired to make this us versus them distinction instantly and automatically. It is the root of everything from sports rivalries to nationalism, racism, and religious conflict. 22. The fundamental attribution error. What it is: the tendency to overemphasize personality-based explanations for behaviors observed in others, while underemphasizing situational explanations. For our own behavior, we do the opposite. The example: someone cuts you off in traffic. Your immediate reaction is, "What a jerk! That person is a reckless, inconsiderate driver." You've attributed their behavior to their personality. Now, imagine you cut someone off in traffic. You'd tell yourself, "I'm so sorry. I'm late for a really important meeting, and I didn't see them. I don't normally drive like this." You've attributed your behavior to the situation. Why it works? We have access to the full context of our own situation and intentions, but we don't have that information for others. Our brain takes a shortcut, assuming another person's actions are a direct reflection of who they are, because it's a simpler, more efficient explanation than considering all the possible situational factors we can't see. 23. The actor-observer bias. What it is: a close cousin of the fundamental attribution error. It's the tendency to attribute our own actions to external causes while attributing others' behaviors to internal ones. The example:
If you fail an exam, you might say the questions were unfair or the room was too hot, external or situational factors. If your classmate fails the same exam, you might think they're not very smart or didn't study hard enough, internal or personal factors. Why it works? It's a self-protective mechanism. Attributing our failures to the situation protects our ego. Attributing others' failures to their character can make us feel comparatively better or more in control of our own outcomes.
25. The false consensus effect. What it is: the tendency for people to overestimate the degree to which their own opinions, beliefs, preferences, values, and habits are normal and typical of those of others. The example: a person who loves spicy food might be genuinely surprised to learn that many people dislike it. Someone who is passionate about a particular political issue might assume that the silent majority agrees with them. We use our own perspective as an anchor and have a hard time adjusting it to accommodate the diversity of human experience. Why it works: our social circle often consists of people who are similar to us, a result of in-group bias, which reinforces the idea that our views are the norm. It's also comforting to believe that we are part of a consensus, as it validates our own beliefs and makes us feel less alone. 26. The bystander effect. What it is: a social psychological phenomenon in which individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when other people are present. The story, though now somewhat contested, is that of Kitty Genovese in 1964, New York, who was attacked while dozens of people supposedly heard her screams but did nothing. The reason isn't necessarily apathy. It's a diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only one present, the responsibility to act is 100% on you. When there are 30 other people, the responsibility is diffused. Each person feels only 1/30th of the pressure to intervene. Everyone assumes someone else will or should do something. Why it works: it's a combination of diffusion of responsibility and a desire to conform. We look to others for cues on how to act. If nobody else is panicking or intervening, we assume the situation must not be a real emergency, and we don't want to be the one who overreacts and embarrasses themselves. 27. The groupthink phenomenon. What it is: a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. The historical example: the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion is often cited as a classic example of groupthink. President John F. Kennedy's inner circle of advisors was so cohesive and so loyal to the president that dissenting opinions were suppressed. No one wanted to be the skunk at the garden party and challenge the plan, so a flawed plan went forward with catastrophic results. Why it works: in a tight-knit group, the desire for social cohesion can override the desire to make a good decision. The group develops an illusion of invulnerability, rationalizes away warnings, and applies pressure to anyone who expresses doubt. The result is a collective blindness to risk and reality. 28. The Pygmalion effect, or Rosenthal effect. What it is: the phenomenon whereby higher expectations placed upon people lead to an increase in their performance. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The research: in a famous experiment, researchers told public school teachers that certain students were intellectual bloomers who were expected to show remarkable gains. In reality, these students were chosen at random. A year later, these randomly chosen students showed significantly greater IQ gains than their peers.
The teacher's high expectations changed how they interacted with those students, giving them more attention, more challenging work, and more encouragement, which in turn led to the students' improved performance. Why it works? Our beliefs about others change our actions toward them, and their actions then change to match our beliefs. It creates a powerful feedback loop. The opposite, the golem effect, is also true. Low expectations can lead to a decrease in performance. 29. The outgroup homogeneity bias. What it is: the perception that members of an outgroup are more similar to one another than are members of one's in-group. In short, they are all alike. We are all diverse individuals. The example: someone from country A might see all people from country B as sharing the same customs, beliefs, and personality traits. However, they would perceive the people from their own country A as a collection of unique and varied individuals. Why it works? We have more experience and interaction with members of our in-group, so we are more familiar with their individual differences. We have less contact with out-group members, so our brain relies on stereotypes and generalizations as a mental shortcut.
30. The projection bias. What it is: the tendency to unconsciously assume that others share the same or similar thoughts, beliefs, values, or positions. The example: you are feeling anxious and stressed. You might then perceive the people around you as being more critical or hostile than they actually are, because you are projecting your own internal state onto them. Or, if you are a very honest person, you might assume that everyone else is also fundamentally honest, making you more vulnerable to being deceived. Why it works? Our own current emotional and cognitive state is the most readily available information we have. Our brain uses our own internal world as a baseline to predict the internal worlds of others, even when it's an inaccurate guide. Part 3.4. Memory biases. The stories we tell ourselves. Our memory is not a perfect video recording of the past. It is a reconstructive, highly suggestible, and deeply biased storyteller. These biases ensure that the story of our past is often more comforting than it is accurate. 1. Hindsight bias, the "I knew it all along" effect. What it is: the tendency after an event has occurred to see the event as having been predictable, despite there having been little or no objective basis for predicting it. The example: after a stock market crash, financial pundits will appear on TV and explain with great confidence exactly why the crash was inevitable, pointing to all the signs that were supposedly there all along. Before the crash, however, those same signs were just noise among thousands of other data points. Once the outcome is known, our brain neatly reconstructs a narrative that makes that outcome seem like the only logical possibility. Why it works? It creates a reassuring illusion of order and predictability in a chaotic world. If the past was predictable, then the future might be too. It helps us feel that we understand the world better than we actually do. 32. Rosy retrospection. What it is: the tendency to remember past events more fondly than they were in reality. We tend to filter out the negative aspects of a memory over time, leaving a rosy glow. The example: people often remember their high school or college years as a golden era of fun and freedom. They forget the stress of exams, the social anxiety, and the periods of boredom. They remember the highlight reel, not the full, unedited film. Why it works? It's a psychological coping mechanism.
By sanitizing our past, we protect our present sense of well-being. It allows us to maintain a positive narrative about our life story and the choices we've made. 33. The misinformation effect. What it is: the tendency for post-event information to interfere with the memory of the original event. Our memories are highly malleable and can be corrupted by suggestion. The research. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has done groundbreaking work in this area. In one study, she showed participants a video of a car accident. She then asked some of them how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other, and others how fast were the cars going when they hit each other. The group that heard the more violent verb smashed estimated the speed as significantly higher. A week later, they were also more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass. The wording of the question changed their memory of the event. Why it works. Memory is not a retrieval process, it is a reconstruction process. Every time we recall a memory, we are rebuilding it. New information can get accidentally woven into the fabric of the old memory, creating a new, less accurate version that feels just as real. 34. The Zeigarnik effect. What it is: the tendency for people to remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed tasks. The story. The effect is named after Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik, who noticed that waiters in a restaurant had a much better memory of unpaid orders. Once the bill was paid and the task was complete, their memory of the order quickly faded. This is why cliffhangers in TV shows are so effective. They create an open loop in our minds that we crave to close. 35. The Google effect, revisited in memory. What it is. As mentioned before, this is the tendency to forget information you believe you can easily find online. Its impact on memory. This has profound implications. We are training our brains to deprioritize the what and prioritize the where. Our memory is shifting from being a library of facts to being a library's card catalog. It doesn't hold the books, it just knows where to find them. This can make us feel less knowledgeable, but more skilled at research. 36. The peak-end rule. What it is. The tendency for people to judge an experience largely based on how they felt at its most intense point, the peak, and at its end, rather than based on the total sum or average of every moment of the experience. The example. Imagine two painful medical procedures. Procedure A is short, but ends at the moment of maximum pain. Procedure B is longer, has the same peak pain moment, but then gradually subsides, ending with mild discomfort. When asked later, most people will rate Procedure B as less unpleasant, even though it involved a longer total duration of pain. The gentler end of the experience reshaped their entire memory of it. This is why a terrible vacation can be saved by a fantastic final day. Why it works. Our memory is not a faithful accountant of pleasure and pain. It's a storyteller, and the peak and the end are the most dramatic and recent parts of the story, so they're given the most weight in the final summary. 37. The recency effect. What it is. The tendency to remember the most recently presented information best. The example. If you are given a long list of items to remember, you are most likely to recall the last few items on the list. This is why in a debate or presentation, the closing statement is so critical. It's the part of the message that is freshest in the audience's mind. Why it works. The most recent information is still active in our short-term or working memory, making it easily accessible for recall. 38. The primacy effect. What it is. The tendency to remember the first piece of information we encounter better than information presented later on. The example. In that same long list of items, you are also more likely to remember the first few items. This is because your brain had more time and resources to transfer that initial information into long-term memory. The combination of the primacy and recency effects means that information presented in the middle of a list, a speech, or a lesson is the most likely to be forgotten. Why it works. First impressions matter, not just in social situations, but in memory itself. The brain pays special attention to the beginning of a sequence as it tries to orient itself. 39. Cryptomnesia, unconscious plagiarism. What it is. A memory bias whereby a person mistakenly believes that a thought, idea, song, or joke is their own original creation, when in fact they are unintentionally recalling a memory of someone else's work. The story. This has happened to many famous musicians and writers. They create something that feels deeply personal and original, only to be later confronted with an older, similar work that they had encountered years before and forgotten. Their brains stored the memory, but forgot the source, leading them to believe the idea was generated internally. Why it works. It's a failure of source monitoring. Our brain is generally better at remembering the content of a memory than the context in which we acquired it, where we heard it, who said it. When the source tag is lost, we can easily misattribute the memory to ourselves. 40. The self-reference effect. What it is. The tendency for people to have a better memory for information that relates to themselves in some way. The example. If you are trying to remember a list of adjectives, you will have a much easier time if you spend a moment thinking about whether each adjective describes you. Words like curious, energetic, or calm become far more memorable when they are linked to the most well-developed and important schema in your entire brain, your concept of self. Why it works. The self-concept is a dense, highly organized network of memories, beliefs, and emotions. When new information is linked to this network, it has far more connections to hold it in place, making it easier to retrieve later.
Section 4. The ripple effect. How biases shape our world. Cognitive biases are not just interesting psychological quirks. They are the invisible currents that steer the ships of our lives, our finances, our relationships, and our societies. Understanding them in the abstract is one thing. Seeing them in action is another. Part 4.1. Biases in Personal Finance and Investing. The world of money is supposed to be rational, a realm of numbers and calculated risks. In reality, it is a playground for our most powerful cognitive biases. Loss aversion and the sunk cost fallacy. An investor buys a stock at $100. It drops to $50. A rational analysis might suggest selling it and reinvesting the remaining money in a more promising asset. But loss aversion makes selling feel like locking in a painful loss. The sunk cost fallacy whispers, "You've already invested so much, you can't sell now, it might bounce back." This combination leads investors to hold on to their losing investments for far too long, hoping to break even, while often selling their winning investments too early to lock in a small gain, afraid that it might disappear. They become risk-averse with their gains and risk-seeking with their losses, the exact opposite of a sound strategy. The bandwagon effect and herd mentality. Financial markets are prone to bubbles and crashes driven by social proof. When a stock like GameStop or a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin starts to rise rapidly, people see others getting rich and jump on the bandwagon, driven by a fear of missing out, or FOMO. They buy not because they understand the asset's fundamental value, but because everyone else is buying. This pushes the price up to unsustainable levels, creating a bubble. Eventually, the bubble pops, and the same herd mentality takes over in reverse, causing a panic selling crash. Confirmation bias. An investor who is bullish on a particular company will actively seek out good news about that company, positive earnings reports, optimistic analyst ratings, while dismissing any negative news as temporary noise. This creates a dangerous echo chamber that prevents them from seeing the warning signs of a potential decline. The anchoring effect. The price at which you first buy a stock can become a powerful and irrational anchor. If you bought it at $200, you might be unwilling to sell it for $150, even if its true value has fallen to $100, because your mind is anchored to the initial price, and selling for less feels like a failure.
Confirmation bias and the media. The modern media landscape allows us to live in perfectly curated filter bubbles. We can choose to only consume news from sources that confirm our existing political beliefs. This constant validation makes our beliefs more extreme and makes us less tolerant of opposing views. Social media algorithms exacerbate this, feeding us more and more of what we already like, creating a dangerous feedback loop of polarization. The just world hypothesis. This can be used to justify social inequality. The belief that people get what they deserve can lead to the conclusion that those in poverty are there because they are lazy or made bad choices, ignoring the vast systemic and situational factors that contribute to poverty. It allows those who are privileged to feel that their success is purely the result of their own merit, while the struggles of others are their own fault. The availability heuristic. The news media, by its very nature, focuses on dramatic and negative events, crime, conflict, disaster. This creates a skewed perception of reality. By making these negative events so mentally available, the media can make the world seem far more dangerous and violent than it actually is, leading to a culture of fear and anxiety. Section 5. The Toolkit for a Clearer Mind. How to Spot and Counter Cognitive Biases. So, are we doomed to be puppets of our own flawed programming? Not at all. The very act of learning about these biases is the first and most crucial step in overcoming them. You cannot fight an enemy you cannot see. Now that we can see the invisible architect, we can begin to negotiate with it. The goal is not to eliminate System 1 thinking. That would be impossible and undesirable. Our intuition is a powerful and often reliable guide. The goal is to learn when to trust our intuition and when to slow down and engage our more deliberate, logical System 2. Here is a practical toolkit for doing just that. 1. Slow down, especially for important decisions. The principle. Most biases thrive on speed. They are the result of our brain's desire to make fast, effortless judgments. The single most effective way to counter bias is to intentionally slow down your thinking process, especially when the stakes are high. The technique: before making a significant financial decision, a major life choice, or forming a strong opinion on a complex issue, simply pause. Give yourself time. Don't respond to an email immediately. Sleep on a big decision. This creates a space for your reflective system 2 to catch up with your impulsive system 1. 2. Actively seek disconfirming evidence. The principle: your brain's natural tendency is to find evidence that confirms your beliefs, confirmation bias. To counter this, you must consciously do the opposite. The technique: Charles Darwin was famously aware of this trap. Whenever he came across a piece of data that seemed to contradict his theory of evolution, he had a rule. He had to write it down within 30 minutes. He knew that his mind would otherwise find a way to forget or dismiss this inconvenient fact. You can adopt a similar practice. When you form a strong opinion, make it a habit to actively search for the best arguments against your position. Steelman the other side's argument instead of strawmanning it. This is difficult and uncomfortable, but it is the hallmark of a true critical thinker. 3. Consider the opposite. The principle: before settling on a conclusion, take a moment to ask yourself, what if the opposite were true? The technique: if you convinced a particular business venture is a guaranteed success, spend 10 minutes seriously considering all the ways it could fail. This is a technique known as a pre-mortem. Imagine you're in the future and the project has failed spectacularly. Now tell the story why it failed. This simple act of imagining the opposite can illuminate risks and flaws that your optimism bias might have blinded you to. 4. Be mindful of your emotional state. The principle: our cognitive biases are strongest when we are in a heightened emotional state, angry, fearful, excited, or stressed. These emotions are the native language of System 1. The technique: recognize when you are emotionally charged. If you are angry, you are more likely to fall prey to the fundamental attribution error and blame others. If you are anxious, you are more likely to be swayed by the availability heuristic and overestimate risk. Learn to recognize these states in yourself and avoid making important decisions until you have returned to a calmer, more neutral baseline. 5. Reframe the situation. The principle: the way information is framed can dramatically change our perception of it. We can use this to our advantage. The technique: if you are faced with a choice, try to rephrase it in a different way. If a product is presented as 90% fat-free, ask yourself, what does 10% fat actually mean? If you're agonizing over a potential loss aversion, reframe it as an opportunity for a new gain. By consciously changing the frame, you can break the spell that the initial framing cast on you in your intuitive mind. 6. Use checklists and algorithms. The principle: our intuitive judgment is unreliable, especially in complex situations. Simple, formal processes can often outperform expert intuition. The technique: this is why pilots use pre-flight checklists and doctors use diagnostic protocols. It's not that they aren't smart, it's that they know their brains are fallible, especially under pressure. You can create your own simple checklists for important, repeatable decisions in your life, whether it's for investing, hiring, or even just evaluating a news source. A checklist forces you to slow down and consider all the relevant factors, rather than relying on a biased gut feeling. 7. Cultivate empathy and perspective-taking. The principle: many of our worst social biases, like the fundamental attribution error and in-group bias, stem from a failure to appreciate the perspective of others. The technique: make a genuine effort to understand the world from another person's point of view, especially if they are from an out-group. Read books, watch documentaries, and have conversations with people who are different from you. Before you judge someone's actions, try to imagine the situational pressures they might be under. This practice of empathy is a powerful antidote to the tribalism that is so deeply wired into our brains. Conclusion: the conscious architect. We have journeyed deep into the intricate and often treacherous landscape of the human mind. We have seen that we are not the purely rational beings we like to think we are. Our minds are guided by an ancient code, a set of shortcuts and biases designed for a world of immediate physical survival. This code, once a masterpiece of evolutionary design, is now the source of our most predictable errors in judgment. We are all, to some degree, living within a reality constructed by these biases. They anchor our thoughts, frame our choices, confirm our beliefs, and divide us into tribes. They are the invisible architect, working silently in the background of our consciousness. But the story does not end there. The fact that you are here, listening to these words, is a testament to the human brain's most remarkable capability, its capacity for self-awareness. Unlike any other creature on this planet, we can turn our attention inward. We can observe our own thinking. We can become aware of our own biases. The goal, then, is not to achieve a state of perfect bias-free rationality. That is an impossible and perhaps even inhuman ideal. Our intuition, our gut feelings, and our mental shortcuts are essential parts of who we are. They provide us with speed, creativity, and the ability to navigate a complex world without being paralyzed by analysis. The true goal is to move from being an unwitting resident of the house the architect built for you to becoming its conscious co-designer. It is the shift from automatic passive acceptance to deliberate active awareness. It is the wisdom to know when to trust your gut and the courage to know when to question it. This journey of self-awareness is not easy. It requires humility, the humility to admit that we might be wrong. It requires courage, the courage to confront our most cherished beliefs. And it requires diligence, the constant, quiet effort of observing our own mind at work. The world will continue to be a place full of people and systems that seek to exploit your cognitive biases, from marketers and politicians to social media algorithms. They will try to anchor you, frame you, and pull you onto their bandwagon. But now you have the toolkit. You can recognize the patterns. You can feel the pull of the bias and choose to pause, to reflect, and engage the slower, more thoughtful part of your mind. You are no longer in the dark. You have seen the code.